The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, Chapter 1. After leaving Vienna, and long before you come to Budapest, the Danube enters a region of singular loneliness and desolation, where its waters spread away on all sides, regardless of miles upon miles, covered by a vast sea of low willow bushes. On the big maps, this deserted area, it may be seen in large straggling letters, the word Sumpfe, meaning marshes. In rust and the free wind, showing their silver leaves to the sunshine in an ever-moving plain of bewildering beauty. These willows never attain to the dig, weighing on slender stems that answer to the least pressure of the wind, supple as grasses, until continually shifting, that they sum that the entire plain is moving and alive. For the wind sends waves rising and falling over the whole surface, waves of leaves instead of waves of water, green swells like the sea. Control of the stern banks. The Danube here wanders about at will among the intricate network of channels intersecting the islands everywhere. Avenues down which the waters pour with a shouting sound, make whirlpools, eddies, and foaming rapids, tearing at the sandy banks, carrying away masses of shore and willow clumps, and forming new islands innumerably, which shift daily in size and shape, and possess at best an impermanent life, since the flood time obliterates their very existence. Properly speaking, this fascinating part of the river's life begins soon after leaving Pressburg, and we, in our Canadian canoe, with gypsy tent and frying pan on board, reached it on the crest of a rising flood about mid-July. That very same morning, when the sky was reddening before sunrise, we had slipped swiftly through still sleeping Vienna, leaving it a couple of hours later, a mere patch of smoke against the blue hills of the Wienerwald on the horizon. We had breakfasted below Fischermend under a grove of birch trees roaring in the wind, and had then swept on the tearing current past Orth, Heinburg, Petronell, the old Roman Carnuntum of Marcus Aurelius, and so under the frowning heights of Felsen on a spur of the Carpathians, where the march steals in quietly from the left, and the frontier is crossed between Austria and Hungary. And racing along at 12 kilometers an hour soon took us well into Hungary, and the muddy waters, sure sign of flood, sent us aground on many a shingle bed, and twisted us like a cork in many a sudden belching whirlpool before the towers of Pressburg, Hungarian, Poznan showed against the sky. And then the canoe, leaping like a spirited horse, flew at top speed under the gray walls, negotiated safely the sunken chain of the Fliegende Brücke ferry, turned the corner sharply to the left, and plunged on yellow foam into the wilderness of islands, sandbanks, and swampland beyond Land of the Willows. The change came suddenly, as when a series of bioscope pictures snaps down on the streets of a town and shifts without warning into the scenery of lake and forest. We entered the land of desolation on wings, and in less than half an hour there was neither boat nor fishing hut nor red roof, nor any single sign of human habitation and civilization within sight. The sense of remoteness from the world of humankind, the utter isolation, the fascination of this singular world of willows, winds, and waters instantly laid its spell upon us both, so that we allowed laughingly to one another that we ought by rights to have held some special kind of passport to admit us, and that we had, somewhat audaciously, come without asking leave into a separate little kingdom of wonder and magic, a kingdom that was reserved for the use of others who had a right to it, with everywhere unwritten warnings to trespassers for those who had the imagination to discover them. Though still early in the afternoon, the ceaseless buffetings of a most tempestuous wind made us feel weary, and we at once began casting about for a suitable camping ground for the night. But the bewildering character of the islands made landing difficult. The swirling flood carried us inshore and then swept us out again. The willow branches tore our hands as we seized them to stop the canoe, and we pulled many a yard of sandy bank into the water before at length we shot with a great sideways blow from the wind into a backwater and managed to beach the bows in a cloud of spray. Then we lay panting and laughing after our exertions on the hot yellow sand, sheltered from the wind, and in the full blaze of a scorching sun, a cloudless blue sky above, and an immense army of dancing, shouting willow bushes closing in from all sides, shining with spray and clapping their 1,000 little hands as though to applaud the success of our efforts. What a river, I said to my companion, thinking of all the way we had traveled from the source in the Black Forest, and how we had often been obliged to wade and push in the upper shallows at the beginning of Junes. Won't stand much nonsense now, will it, he said, pulling the canoe a little farther into safety up the sand, and then composing himself for a nap. I lay by his side, happy and peaceful, in the bath of the elements, water, wind, sand, and the great fire of the sun, thinking of the long journey that lay behind us, and of the great stretch before us to the Black Sea, and how lucky I was to have such a delightful and charming traveling companion as my friend, the Swede. We had made many similar journeys together, but the Danube, more than any other river I knew, impressed us from the very beginning with its aliveness, from its tiny bubbling entry into the world among the pinewood gardens at Donaueschingen, until this moment when it began to play the great river game of losing itself among the deserted swamps, unobserved, unrestrained. It had seemed to us like following the growth of some living creature, sleepy at first, but later developing violent desires as it became conscious of its deep soul. It rolled like some huge fluid being through all the countries we had passed, holding a little craft on its mighty shoulders, playing roughly with us sometimes, yet always friendly and well-meaning, till at length we had come inevitably to regard it as a great personage. How indeed could it be otherwise, since it told us so much of its secret life? At night we heard it singing to the moon as we lay in our tent, uttering that odd, sibilant note peculiar to itself, and said it was caused by the rapid tearing of the pebbles along its bed. So great is its hurrying speed. We knew, too, the voice of its gurgling whirlpools, suddenly bubbling up on a surface previously quite calm, the roar of its shallows and swift rapids, its constant steady thundering below, all mere surface sounds, and that ceaseless tearing of its icy waters at the banks, how it stood up and shouted when the rains fell flat upon its face, and how its laughter roared out when the wind blew upstream and tried to stop its growing speed. We knew all its sounds and voices, its tumblings and foamings, its unnecessary splashing against the bridges, that self-conscious chatter when there were hills to look up, the affected dignity of its speech when it passed through the little towns, far too important to laugh, and all these faint, sweet whisperings when the sun caught it fairly in some slow curve and poured down upon it till the steam rose. It was full of tricks, too, in its early life, before the great world knew it. There were places in the upper reaches among the Swabian forests, when yet the first whispers of its destiny had not reached it, where it elected to disappear through holes in the ground, to appear again on the other side of the porous limestone hills and start a new river with another name, leaving too so little water in its own bed that we had to climb out and wade and push the canoe through miles of shallows. And her chief pleasure in those early days of its irresponsible youth was to lie low, like Brer Fox, just before the little turbulent tributaries came to join it from the Alps, and to refuse to acknowledge them when in, but to run for miles side by side, the dividing line well marked, the very levels different, the Danube utterly declining to recognize the newcomer. Below Passau, however, it gave out this particular trick, for there the Inn comes in with a thundering power impossible to ignore, and so pushes and incommodes the parent river that there is hardly room for them in the long, twisting gorge that follows. And the Danube is shoved this way and that against the cliffs and forced to hurry itself with great waves and much dashing to and fro in order to get through and nigh. And during the fight, our canoe slipped down from its shoulder to its breast and had the ebb of its life among the struggling waves. But the Inn taught the old river a lesson, and after Passau, it no longer pretended to ignore new arrivals. This was many days back, of course. And since then, we had come to know other aspects of the great creature. And across the Bavarian wheat plain of Straubing, she wandered so slowly under the blazing June sun that we could well imagine only the surface inches were water, while below there moved, concealed as by a silken mantle, a whole army of undines passing silently and unseen down to the sea, and very leisurely too, lest they be discovered. Much too we forgave her because of her friendliness to the birds and animals that haunted the shores. Cormorants lined the banks in lonely places in rows like short black palings. Gray crows crowded the shingle beds. Storks stood fishing in the vistas of shallower water that opened up between the islands. And hawks, swans, and marsh birds of all sorts filled the air with glinting wings and singing petulant cries. It was impossible to feel annoyed with the river's vagaries after seeing a deer leap with a splash into the water at sunrise and swim past the bows of the canoe. And often we saw fawns peering at us from the underbrush, or look straight into the brown eyes of the stag as we charged full tilt round a corner and entered another reach of the river. Foxes, too, everywhere haunted the banks, tripping daintily among the driftwood and disappearing so suddenly that it was impossible to see how they managed it. But now, after leaving Pressburg, everything changed a little, and the Danube became more serious. It ceased trifling. It was halfway to the Black Sea, within seeming distance almost of other stranger countries where no tricks would be permitted or understood. It became suddenly grown up and claimed our respect and even our awe. It broke out into three arms, for one thing, that only met again 100 kilometers farther down. And for a canoe, there were no indications which one was intended to be followed. If you take a side channel, said the Hungarian officer we met in the Pressburg shop while buying provisions, you may find yourselves, when the flood subsides, 40 miles from anywhere, high and dry, and you may easily starve. There are no people, no farms, no fishermen. I warn you not to continue. The river, too, is still rising, and this wind will increase. The rising river didn't alarm us in the least, but the matter of being left high and dry by a sudden subsidence of the waters might be serious, and we had consequently laid in an extra stock of provisions. For the rest, the officer's prophecy held true, and the wind, blowing down a perfectly clear sky, increased steadily till it reached the dignity of a westerly gale. It was earlier than usual when we camped, for the sun was a good hour or two from the horizon. And leaving my friend still asleep on the hot sand, I wandered about in desultory examination of our hotel. The island, I found, was less than an acre in extent, a mere sandy bank standing some 2 or 3 feet above the level of the river. The far end, pointing into the sunset, was covered with flying spray, which the tremendous wind drove off the crests of the broken waves. Waves against the bank, as though to sweep it bodily away, and then swirling by in 2 foaming streams on either side. And as I gazed, long and curiously, a singular emotion began to stir. Somewhere in the thing to do with it too, a vague, unpleasant idea that we had somehow trifled with these great elemental forces in whose power we lay helpless every hour of the day and or another. Somewhere link on intimately with human life and human experience. They stir comprehensible. They had. It was a slight depression in the center of the island, and here we pitched the tent. The surrounding willows broke the wind serious. I ran out quickly and joined him on the bank. He was looking over the river, pointing at something in the water. Melting away down there into the sea of willows, where the sun caught them in the bend of the river and turned them into a great crimson wall of beauty. Adventurous trip, a tower of strength when untoward things happened. I looked at his strong face and light curly hair as he staggered along, flew about overhead like fireworks. A few yards beyond, the river gurgled and hissed, and from eye to eye, and we, in our rashness, had dared to invade it, you to make use of it. Something more than the power of its mystery stirred in me. Is very vivid. To the wanderer especially, camps have their note either of welcome or rejection. He always said the same things, but it was the cry for companionship that gave the real